My parents skipped my wedding because I dared to tie the knot before my perfect little sister, and now my relatives are boycotting her lavish upcoming wedding, claiming I've single-handedly trashed my parents' precious reputation. I'm Abigail Harper, 28 years old, and I guess you could say I'm the unremarkable one in the family, just a short, slightly chubby woman living a quiet life in Burlington, Vermont. I work as an accountant at a small local firm, crunching numbers day in and day out, and I share a cozy, unpretentious home with my husband, Daniel Carter. Don't get me wrong, I don't hate my life. It's simple, predictable, and honestly, that's fine by me. I'm not the type to chase glamour or turn heads, and I've made peace with that. But my family? They've never quite seen it that way. Let me introduce you to the Harpers. There's my parents, Richard and Evelyn, who live just a few miles away in the same town they've called home for decades. And then there's my younger sister, Charlotte, 26, the undisputed golden child. Charlotte's the kind of woman who stops traffic. Tall, stunning, with the kind of face and figure that could have made her a supermodel. In fact, she dabbled in fashion back when she was in New York, strutting her stuff for a few gigs before she decided to focus on her education. She graduated with a finance degree from Yale. Yes, Yale. And now she's some big shot manager at a fancy corporation in Boston. My parents can't stop bragging about her. Every family gathering, every phone call, it's Charlotte this and Charlotte that. Me, I'm lucky if I get a nod. I've always been the spare, the afterthought, the daughter who doesn't give them anything to show off. Growing up with Charlotte in Burlington wasn't exactly a picnic. She's 2 years younger, but you'd think she was born to rule over me. I remember the way she'd smirk at me across the dinner table, her perfect blonde hair bouncing as she'd say something like, "Abigail, maybe if you didn't eat so much pie, you'd fit into something nicer." She'd laugh, and her little posse of friends at school, girls I should have had seniority over being the older sister, would pick up where she left off. They'd follow me down the halls at Burlington High, whispering about my thrift store jeans or my less than stellar grades. I tried to brush it off, told myself they were just kids being petty, but Charlotte never let up. I'd reach out, invite her to hang out, try to bond over dumb stuff like movies or ice cream runs to the lakefront, but she'd just roll her eyes and say, "Why would I waste my time with you?" It wasn't enough for her to shine. She needed me to feel dim in comparison. I don't blame her for being good at everything, sports, school, looks, but I got tired of her making sure I knew I wasn't. My parents didn't help. Richard and Evelyn Harper have never been shy about playing favorites. Charlotte was their pride and joy, the daughter they could parade around like a trophy. I've got this memory burned into my brain from when I graduated from the community college here in town. I'd worked hard, balanced a part-time job at a diner with night classes, and when I walked across that stage, all I got from them was a half-hearted, "Good job, Abigail, that's nice." Abigail sash, no party, no congratulations card, just a quick pat on the back before they changed the subject. Compare that to when Charlotte got into Yale. They threw a huge bash at the house, invited half the neighborhood, and Dad even rented a tent so everyone could toast her under fairy lights. I stood in the corner that night, nursing a soda, watching them beam like she'd cured cancer. I'm not saying I needed a tent, but a little enthusiasm would have been nice. Over the years, I figured out it was pointless to compete. They'd made their choice and it wasn't me. So I built my own life. I moved out at 20, got my accounting gig, met Daniel, a steady, kind guy who doesn't care that I'm not a runway model, and stopped trying to win my parents' approval. I kept things civil though. I'd call them every couple of months, show up to the occasional Thanksgiving at their place on Maple Street, but that was it. I didn't want the drama of cutting them off completely. They're obsessed with how things look to the outside world, and I knew they'd turn it into some big sob story if I went silent. "Oh, poor us, Abigail's abandoned her family." No thanks. I'd rather keep the peace at a distance than deal with that mess. It worked for a while. They had Charlotte to fawn over, and I had my quiet little corner of Burlington to call my own. Then, 8 months ago, everything changed. Daniel proposed after 3 years together, and I said yes. We planned a small wedding, nothing fancy, just a sweet ceremony at St. Paul's Church downtown and a reception at a local barn venue. I was nervous but excited, and I did the dutiful daughter thing. I sent out invitations, thick cream-coloured cards with gold lettering mailed right to my parents' doorstep, and I even followed up with an email just to be sure. I invited Charlotte too, though I didn't expect her to show. Our relationship's been frosty for years. She'd probably rather get a root canal than watch me walk down the aisle. But my parents? I figured they'd come. They're all about keeping up appearances, and skipping their eldest daughter's wedding would raise eyebrows in a gossipy town like this. So when the big day rolled around and I stood there in my off-the-rack dress, scanning the pews for their faces, I couldn't believe it. They weren't there. No Richard, no Evelyn, no explanation. Charlotte's absence didn't faze me, but my parents not showing up, that hit me hard. People kept asking, "Where's your mom and dad?" And I'd mumble something vague, forcing a smile. Inside, I was reeling. I didn't get it! Why would they do this? I had no answers then, but I was damn sure I'd find out soon enough. The wedding itself was beautiful in its own small, imperfect way. Even if the absence of my parents left a hollow ache I couldn't shake. We held it at St. Paul's Church, this quaint little stone building nestled in downtown Burlington, with its stained glass windows casting soft colours over the handful of guests who showed up. Daniel and I didn't go overboard. White lilies on the pews, a rented barn out on Shelburne Road for the reception, and a playlist of classic rock tunes humming through a borrowed speaker. My friends from the accounting firm were there, laughing and toasting with cheap champagne, and Daniel's cousins drove up from Rutland to join us. It should have been perfect, and in some ways it was. But every time I glanced at the empty seats where my parents should have been, it stung, like a paper cut that won't stop bleeding. People noticed, too. My friend Sarah from work pulled me aside during the cake cutting and whispered, "Hey, where's your mum and dad? Everything okay?" I forced a shrug and mumbled, "Oh, they're probably just busy." But the words tasted sour. Busy? On their daughter's wedding day? Even Daniel's Aunt Linda raised an eyebrow, muttering something about it being odd as she sipped her wine. I plastered on a smile, danced with Daniel to Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark, and tried to focus on the warmth of his hand in mine. But deep down, I was unraveling. A few days later, I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. I had to confront them. I waited until the post-wedding chaos settled, when the thank you notes were mailed and the leftover cake was stashed in our freezer, before I picked up the phone. My hands were shaky as I dialed their number, the same one they've had since I was a kid growing up on Maple Street. "Mom? Hey." Evelyn answered first, her voice clipped and cool like she'd been expecting me to call and ruin her day. "Abigail," she said. "What do you want? No, how was the wedding? No, sorry we missed it," just that icy edge I'd heard 1,000 times. I took a deep breath and asked, point blank, "Why didn't you come?" There was a pause, a rustle, and then, "Dad," Richard snatched the phone. "We didn't get an invitation," he barked, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. I blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about? I sent them, paper ones in the mail, emails too. I triple-checked the list." Evelyn chimed in, her voice wobbling like she was about to cry. "Well, we didn't see anything, Abigail. How could you be so irresponsible?" "Irresponsible? Me?" I felt my chest tighten, anger bubbling up like a pot boiling over. I snapped back. "You're lying. I know you got them." Richard roared, "Don't you dare accuse us of that. You've always been careless." The call turned into a shouting match, me insisting I'd done my part, them doubling down on their flimsy excuse. I hung up mid-sentence, slamming the phone down so hard it rattled the coffee table, my heart pounding with a mix of fury and confusion. They were lying. I knew it in my gut. But why? That night, I spilled everything to Daniel over a couple of beers on our sagging couch. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed, then leaned forward and said, "Abigail, I think I know what's going on." I stared at him, half expecting a joke, but his face was dead serious. He started piecing it together, pulling up memories I'd brushed off at the time. "Remember when you told them we were engaged?" he asked. "Over that video call last spring?" I nodded. I'd called them from our kitchen, beaming as I flashed the modest ring Daniel had slipped on my finger. I'd thought they'd be thrilled, or at least fake it. But Mum had gone silent. her lips pressed into a thin line, and Dad's eyes had darkened like a storm rolling in. I chalked it up to them being caught off guard, maybe even annoyed I hadn't told them in person, but Daniel saw something else. They weren't happy, he said. It wasn't surprise, it was disappointment. Then he dropped the real bombshell, the engagement party. We'd thrown it at the Rusty Anchor, this divey little restaurant by Lake Champlain, and I'd been too busy mingling to notice much, but Daniel had seen my parents tucked in a corner, heads bent over their phone, talking in hushed tones. He'd wandered over to say hi, figuring he'd play the polite future son-in-law, and caught Mum's voice through the chatter. "Don't worry, Charlotte, you're still everything to us." He couldn't hear Charlotte's side, but her sobs crackled through the speaker, loud and raw. Dad had patted the air like he was soothing a child, muttering, "We've got you, sweetheart." When they spotted Daniel, they'd fumbled the phone away and plastered on fake smiles, but the damage was done. "They didn't come to the wedding because of her," Daniel said, his voice low. "Charlotte couldn't handle you getting married first, and they picked her over you." I sat there, the beer going flat in my hand, as his words sank in. It wasn't just a random slight, it was a calculated choice. My mind raced back to all the times they'd brushed me off for her. My 16th birthday, when they forgot to plan anything because Charlotte had a soccer tournament the same weekend. The time I landed my first real job after college, and they barely glanced up from her acceptance letter to Yale. I told myself it didn't matter, that I could handle being second best, but this, skipping my wedding because Charlotte's ego couldn't take it, that hit different. I felt the old hurt clawing its way up, sharp and jagged, mingling with a fresh wave of rage. I thought about every forced smile I'd given them, every time I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace, and for what? So they could ditch me the second Charlotte threw a tantrum. I looked at Daniel, his steady brown eyes locked on mine, and something snapped into place. "If they're choosing her," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "then I'm done with them." I didn't know what that meant yet, cutting them out completely, going silent, letting them stew, but I knew I wasn't going to keep playing their game. They'd crossed a line, and I wasn't about to let it slide. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. 8 months after I decided to wash my hands of my parents, life in Burlington had settled into a peaceful rhythm. Daniel and I tending to our little routines, me burying myself in spreadsheets at work, him fixing up old cars in the garage. I'd shoved the whole wedding fiasco into a mental box and locked it tight, figuring I'd never have to deal with Richard and Evelyn's nonsense again. Then, out of nowhere, my cousin Mia texted me one chilly March afternoon while I was sipping coffee at the kitchen table. "Hey, did you hear? Charlotte's engaged." Apparently she'd snagged some hotshot Boston entrepreneur, think private jets and penthouse vibes, and my parents were already deep into planning what Mia called the wedding of the century. They'd booked a swanky hotel on Cape Cod, this sprawling oceanfront place with chandeliers and marble floors, and Charlotte was strutting around telling everyone her dress was a custom Vera Wang, probably costing more than my entire house. Mom and Dad were footing the bill, of course, pulling out all the stops, catered lobster, live bands, the works. Mia said they'd been gushing about it non-stop at the last family dinner I'd skipped. I rolled my eyes at the phone screen, not surprised, but not caring much either. Good for Charlotte, I guess. I'd moved on. Or so I thought. Until my phone rang 2 days later, and Dad's name flashed across it like a warning siren. I should have let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up, and before I could even say hello, Richard's voice exploded through the speaker, loud enough that Daniel glanced over from the couch with a raised eyebrow. "Abigail, you little snake. What the hell have you done to Charlotte's wedding?" I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips as he kept going, his words a raging torrent. "You've been running your mouth, spreading lies that we skipped your wedding because we were jealous for Charlotte. Now half the family's refusing to come to her engagement party, making excuses, saying they're busy and it's all your fault." Mom jumped in next, her voice cracking like she was on the verge of a breakdown. "You've humiliated us, Abigail. We're the laughingstock of Burlington because of you." I sat there, dumbfounded, trying to process the onslaught. Daniel mouthed, "What's happening?" but I waved him off, my brain scrambling to catch up. They thought I'd sabotaged Charlotte's big moment, that I'd turned the family against them. I managed to sputter, "I don't even know what you're talking about." But Dad cut me off, snarling, "Don't play dumb! We know it's you." The call ended with Mum sobbing and Dad slamming the phone down, leaving me staring at the wall, a mix of shock and dread curling in my stomach. It didn't take long to piece together what had happened. Over the past 8 months, I hadn't exactly kept my parents' wedding no-show a secret. When Aunt Linda cornered me at the grocery store a few weeks after, asking why Richard and Evelyn weren't there, I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her they'd blown me off, claimed they'd never got an invite even though I'd sent it. Same thing with Uncle Pete at a barbecue last summer. He'd pressed me over burgers and beers and I'd laid it out, Daniel hearing them console Charlotte, their lame excuses on the phone. I didn't embellish or beg for pity, just gave the facts, blunt and plain, because why should I cover for them? Burlington's a small place, barely 400, 0 people, and word travels fast here. By fall, the story had spread like wildfire through the Harper clan. Cousins whispering at picnics, aunts clucking their tongues over coffee at the diner. I hadn't meant to start a revolt. I just stopped pretending everything was fine. But now, with Charlotte's engagement party looming, the fallout was clear. Mia said half the relatives had RSVP, no, with flimsy reasons. Car trouble, work trips, a sudden flu. And my parents were pinning it all on me. They dug their own grave, I told Daniel that night, pacing the living room. I didn't force them to ditch me. If they're embarrassed, that's on them. He nodded, but I could tell he was bracing for more drama. I wasn't sorry, not really, though I hadn't expected it to blow up this big. Then Charlotte got involved, and things went from messy to outright ugly. My phone buzzed the next morning while I was at work, her name lighting up the screen. I hesitated, should have blocked her right then. But I answered, figuring I'd hear her out. Big mistake. "You're a spiteful, jealous bitch, Abigail," she hissed, skipping any pretense of civility. "You couldn't stand me having my moment, so you poisoned the family against me." Her voice dripped with venom, each word a jab honed from years of practice. I snapped back, adrenaline surging. "You think I owe you silence after what you and they did? I told the truth. Deal with it." She laughed, cold and sharp. "The truth? You're delusional. You've always hated me for being better than you, and now you're ruining my wedding to prove some pathetic point." I shot back, "No, Charlotte. I'm done protecting your precious image. What about me? Where was that when they left me hanging?" The call turned into a screaming match, her accusing me of sabotage, me throwing years of her cruelty back in her face. "You'll regret this," she spat before I could hang up. "I'll make sure everyone sees what a monster you are." I slammed the end button, blocked her number, and tossed the phone onto my desk, my hands shaking. My co-worker Sarah peeked over her cubicle wall, wide-eyed, but I just waved her off. Outside, the snow was falling thick over Burlington streets, but inside me, a storm was raging. Mia called later, saying the family was splitting. Some siding with me, others buying Charlotte's victim act. I didn't care who picked what. My parents had started this war, Charlotte had fanned the flames, and I was done retreating. Whatever came next, I'd face it head on. The fallout from Charlotte's venomous phone call hung over me like a dark cloud, but I didn't have long to stew before my parents came roaring back into the fray. It was a freezing Saturday morning in Burlington, the kind where the wind off Lake Champlain cuts right through your coat, and I was curled up on the couch with a mug of tea when my phone lit up again. This time it was a call from Dad's cell, and when I answered, Richard's voice blared out on speakerphone so loud I nearly dropped my drink. "Abigail, you've gone too damn far," he bellowed, his fury echoing off the walls of our little living room. "You're trying to tear this family apart because you can't stand Charlotte having anything good." I opened my mouth to protest, but the dam inside me burst, and years of pent-up hurt came flooding out. "You think this is about jealousy?" I shouted back, my voice cracking as I stood up, pacing the hardwood floor. "I'm not jealous of her fancy job or her stupid wedding. I'm pissed because you've never once treated me like your daughter. You left me at every turn, ignored my birthdays, acted like my life didn't matter, and then ditched my wedding like I was nothing." Mum's sobs broke through Dad's tirade, a high-pitched wail that grated on my nerves. How can you say that? Evelyn cried. We've given you everything. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Everything? You gave me scraps and saved the feast for Charlotte. Richard snarled. You're unhinged, completely delusional. Then came the kicker. His voice dropped, cold and final. If you think we're such awful parents, fine. Live your life. We're done with you. The line went dead, and I stood there, chest heaving, the silence ringing in my ears. Done with me? Good riddance? I barely had time to catch my breath before Charlotte dragged Daniel into the mess. That afternoon, while I was at the grocery store picking up stuff for dinner, Daniel texted me a screenshot of a message from her, sent from some burner number since I'd blocked her usual one. Tell your wife to apologize, it read, or she'll regret screwing with this family. She's a destructive lunatic. Fix this. Daniel, I got home, fuming, and found him grinning at his phone on the porch swing. She's got some nerve, he said, showing me his reply. You don't get to order me around, Charlotte. Back off. I couldn't help but snort. His calm defiance was the perfect jab, but she didn't take it lying down. 10 minutes later, my phone pinged with a voice message from that same unknown number. Charlotte's voice hissed through, dripping with malice. You think you've won, Abigail? I'm going to tell everyone what a lying, bitter hag you are. Every cousin, every friend, every soul in this town. You're finished. I deleted it without a second thought, my hands trembling not from fear, but from pure white-hot anger. She wanted a war. She'd get one, but on my terms, not hers. The family grapevine started buzzing almost immediately. Mia called me Sunday night, her voice hushed like she was spilling state secrets. Your parents are on a rampage, she said. They're telling everyone you made up some sob story about the wedding because you're green with envy over Charlotte's big day. She paused, then added, but nobody's buying it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, listening as she explained how the relatives were rallying. Uncle Pete had rolled his eyes at Dad's version, muttering, Richard's full of it. I've seen how they treat Abigail. Aunt Linda chimed in at a knitting circle, reminding folks how Mum used to gush about Charlotte's every breath while brushing off my existence. Even cousin Tommy, who'd always been a bit of a loudmouth, spilled that Charlotte had trash-talked me at a Christmas party a few years back, calling me the family disappointment while sipping eggnog. Hearing that lit a spark of validation in me. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. Mia said the engagement party guest list was shrinking by the day, people texting Mum with last-minute cancellations, claiming flat tires or sick kids. I felt a twinge of triumph, but the weight of it all still pressed down hard. My parents were spinning me as the villain. Charlotte was out for blood, and I was stuck in the crosshairs, wondering how deep this rabbit hole would go. Enough was enough. I was done hiding. Monday morning, I opened the family group chat, the one we'd used for years to share potluck schedules and birthday reminders, and let it all out. My fingers flew over the keys as I typed a wall of text. How Mum and Dad had lied about missing my wedding invite, how Daniel overheard them coddling Charlotte's tantrum, how they gaslit me when I called them on it, and how Charlotte had spent decades grinding me down just to feel taller. I hit send, watched the read receipts pile up and braced myself. The responses came fast. Cousin Jenny called me brave, Uncle Pete sent a thumbs up, but Aunt Carol fired back, "This is disgraceful airing dirty laundry like that." A few others piled on, accusing me of stirring the pot for attention, but the majority, Mia, Tommy, Linda, even quiet old great-aunt Ruth, flooded the thread with support. "We've seen it too," Mia wrote. "They've always put Charlotte first." Dad replied with a single line, "You're a disgrace," before he and Mum left the chat entirely. Charlotte stayed silent, probably plotting her next move, but I didn't care. I shut my phone off, sank into the couch next to Daniel, and exhaled a breath I'd been holding for years. For the first time, I felt free. Not just from their grip, but from the guilt I'd carried for not being enough. They could rage all they wanted. I didn't need them anymore. Whatever they threw at me next, I'd be ready. After I dropped that bombshell in the family chat and walked away from the wreckage, I figured the worst of the storm had passed. But my parents and Charlotte weren't about to let it go quietly. A few weeks later, Mia called me with the scoop on Charlotte's big Cape Cod wedding, her voice crackling with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "It was a disaster, Abigail," she said, painting the scene like she'd been there herself. The hotel was decked out, crystal centerpieces, a string quartet, a towering cake that must have cost a fortune, but the pews were practically empty. Only a smattering of Charlotte's Boston work friends and some random +1s showed up. The Burlington crew stayed home, unwilling to make the trek down to Massachusetts for a family they'd soured on. Mom and Dad, desperate to fill the gaps, had apparently hired a bunch of strangers, actors or caterers or whoever they could scrounge up to pose as guests. But Mia said you could spot them a mile away, awkward and out of place in their rented tux. Charlotte, decked out in her Vera Wang gown, reportedly spent half the reception sobbing in the bathroom, mascara streaking down her face, while Dad paced the hall barking orders at the staff. Mum took to Facebook the next day, posting a cryptic rant about an ungrateful child who'd poisoned our joy, obviously aimed at me. I scrolled past it at work, barely glancing at the likes piling up from her church lady friends. Let her vent. I was over it. Dad made one last Hail Mary play a couple days after that fiasco. My phone rang while I was pruning the lilac bush in our backyard, the early summer sun warming my shoulders. I wiped dirt off my hands and answered, half expecting another tirade, but Richard's voice was different this time. Low, almost pleading. "Abigail, you got to fix this," he said, like I was some magic wand he could wave to undo his mess. "The family's falling apart, nobody's talking to us, and it's because of you. Call Mia, call Pete, tell them you were wrong." I stood there, clippers dangling in my hand, and let out a dry laugh. "Fix it? You skipped my wedding, lied about it, and let Charlotte run wild. You made this bed, Dad, lie in it." There was a long silence, then a shaky breath, and he muttered, "You're heartless," before the line clicked off. That was the last I heard from him. Charlotte, though, kept up her petty guerrilla campaign. Nasty texts from new numbers every few days, calling me a backstabber or a nobody who'd die alone. I blocked each one as it came, not even bothering to read past the first word. Their desperation was almost sad, but I wasn't in the business of bailing them out anymore. Life in Burlington started to feel lighter after that, like I'd shed a coat I didn't know was weighing me down. Daniel and I fell back into our groove. Grilling burgers on the patio, binging old sitcoms, taking drives up to Shelburne Farms just to watch the cows graze. The family rift didn't fade, but it shifted in my favor. Mia started texting me invites to low-key get-togethers, poker nights at her place, a bonfire at Uncle Pete's cabin, always with a casual, "No Richard, no Evelyn, don't worry." I showed up to a few, hesitant at first, but the warmth was real. Aunt Linda hugged me tight at a 4th of July cookout, whispering, "We've got your back, kid." And Tommy slapped me on the shoulder, grinning. About time someone called out the bullshit. They weren't just my relatives anymore. They were my people, the ones who chose me when the chips were down. One lazy Sunday, Daniel and I grabbed sandwiches from the deli and parked ourselves on a bench by Lake Champlain, the water glinting gold in the late afternoon light. He nudged me with his elbow, smirking. "You know they lost, right? All that faking and preening, and it still blew up in their faces." I laughed, picking at my pickle spear, and nodded. "Yeah, they did. Their own damn fault." The breeze carried the sound of kids shrieking down by the shore, and for once, I didn't feel that old ache in my chest. Looking back, I don't need my parents' approval, or Charlotte's for that matter, to know who I am. I spent too long chasing scraps of their attention, hoping they'd see me, but that's over. Calm as a slow burn, but it's relentless, and I watched it catch up to them without lifting a finger. Mom and Dad are holed up in their Maple Street bubble, posting vague martyr quotes online while the family drifts further away. Charlotte's probably still strutting around Boston, pretending her wedding wasn't a flop, but the cracks are there. She can't hide them forever. Me, I'm stronger now, rooted in a life I built myself, surrounded by people who don't need me to prove my worth. I'm not the spare anymore. I'm Abigail Harper, and that's enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon that day by the lake, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, I leaned into Daniel's shoulder and let the last threads of that old guilt slip away. They'd lost the game they'd rigged, and I'd won without even playing. That's the sweetest kind of victory.